So we are starting on the assembly process for the vertical shaft support. In the end, we want it to look something kind of like this, right? So I made all of my parts different colors so that I could easily see um, where they're all at. Notice I have two of the bushings in there. The yoke is attached. I'm not going to be too picky about your limits or anything like that, but in the end, the vertical shaft should be able to go up and down. It should also be able to revolve, or the yoke on the end should be able to revolve on that vertical shaft, like that. Everything else should be fastened too. If you wanted to get fancy with it, you could make the bushing housing itself revolve as well. Notice I've got a very subtle angle on there. I basically just put that in there to act like, the plates. How this actually works is that there are little set screws that would go in there and at the bottom to kind of clamp everything tight. We're just acting like they're not there, or that they're there, but we're not actually modeling them or anything. So, if you don't already have an assembly tab down here on the iPad, you can click the arrow and click the plus and then create an assembly, but I've already got one made here. I believe it defaults and creates one for you already. So think about what the easiest part to insert and what kind of your main reference is, just like we did on Fusion 360. Your main reference is going to be your base, right? So your insert's this button up at the top that I just made darker. And then I'm going to click on the base support. So if you notice, it's got the part studio and then the part within. If we did multi-part assemblies, each of these part studios would have multiple parts in it. So I'm going to click on the base support, and I'm just going to start with just this one. So if you remember, the very first thing that we're trying to do is we want to have a single piece that's referenced to. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to ground the first piece, or in how Onshape calls it is fix. So if I click those three dots on the side, I want to fix that first one. So now if I try to move this in any direction, I can't. So we'll build the entire assembly off of that one. So let's go back to my isometric view, lock it. So now I can't orbit. All right, so now I'm going to insert another part. The next one, I'm just going to kind of build this up. I'm going to insert the vertical shaft. So now that that's inserted, I could, and I'm actually going to just move it out of the way because it makes your assembly a little bit easier, because otherwise the references are right on top of each other. So now I'm going to click on this button up here, and it pulls up all of my different joining options. And so we want this one to be able to go up and down, and so we're just going to do a slider mate. So let's imagine we've got a key slot on there that keeps it from revolving. So first I'm going to click on my base. So once you tap once on the iPad, it pulls up what plane you're on, and then you can tap again to pick the actual mate point. So if you remember on Fusion 360, we could hover our mouse and it would show an entire plane, and then we could hold Command to migrate over to that one. So doing it this way, we tap once, it selects the plane, tap again, and it selects the mate connector for us. So next I need to select my vertical shaft. So I'm going to move over. I'm going to do this top area. You can do the cylinder or the face, whatever, but we're really going for that mate connector right there, right? So I want that cylinder, and then on that mate connector, it should pop it over for you. Now remember that it's already set to being a slider joint. We do want to add some sort of limit. So based on where it's at, this actually is trying to slide up. So the minimum is actually, remember this whole base is 4 inches, so let's make the minimum a negative 3.5, and let's make the maximum a 0. Hit the check mark, and then we can see how it behaves. So let's zoom out. I'm going to tap on that vertical shaft. Did it not save it as I wanted? Oh, it did. What does it not like? Why is it not sliding? Oh, I see. I have the base support selected instead. There it goes. Yeah, I had the base support selected instead. So it goes up about that high, and that's it. So that's how we can put a limit in. And like I said, how we have this designed, there really is nothing constraining it, but we want to have that one extra piece. So I used a slider joint. And so guys, remember, I'm recording this as a video, so then it'll be posted again on YouTube, so we'll be able to fill it out after, or go back and watch it again. So let me keep going. I'm going to slide this back up to the top so we can reference to it for the other parts. So the next thing I'm going to add is going to be the yoke, which for me is this purple part. And again, I'm going to slide this out of the way. And the yoke, we want to be able to be revolute. So I'm going to rotate a little bit so I can see a little better. So I'm going to click on my joint menu again. Click on revolute. My first part is going to be the cylinder, the end of it, right there. And then my revolute is going to be the center of that cylinder right there. I can just hit the check mark. That's all we need. This one's pretty easy. There is no limits on it. We just need it to be able to spin. And if you look, it should be lined up flat with the vertical shaft. Okay, let's go back to isometric view. And next what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to do the bushing housing and the bushings separate and make kind of a little bit of a sub-assembly. So I'm going to insert my bushing housing. I'm going to slide him out of the way. Right there. I'm going to insert two bushings. And I think they're both inside my base. So to see them, I'm going to have to click the light bulb. There they are. There's one. And there's two. Turn the base back on. Alright, so now these are just going to be fixed. So to do that, I'm going to go back to my joint menu and do a fastened mate. So not fixed, we don't want to ground them, but fastened. And I'm going to do the outside edge of this circle. Be mindful of the chamfers. So like I'm going to highlight like that face and then click on the center of that circle. Same thing on the bushing. The face itself and then clicking on that. Because I don't want it to be joined kind of funny with the fillet and the chamfer that's on there. Rotate my view, and then do the same. The face, click on the center, then the face, click on the center. And so remember, just like Fusion 360, the reference has nothing to do with this bottom bearing, it only has to do with the top bearing. So once I hit the check mark, it should move all of them together. There we go. We've got a little bit of a sub-assembly now. So now if I go back to my home view, if I click and drag the bushing housing, they all move with it. Alright, and the very last thing is we need to connect this bushing housing to the yoke. So to do that, in real life, there would be what are called set screws. So think about the Vex assemblies that we had, those little black screws that were in the shaft collars. What we can do then is tighten. Like one would go in there and tighten down against the bushing housing to like lock it in. So we're going to reference them based on those circles. I'm going to do a fasten here. On my assembly, I did a revolute with a very minor angle just to almost simulate like the play that we could have with the using the set screws. So we're going to connect from the center of that circle, so right there, and that's going to go on the inside wall of the yoke, like right there. Alright, so it looks a little funny, so what we can do is rotate it by clicking. I'm clicking on this button right here, this little circle. So you can flip the, flip it back and forth linearly, or you can rotate it as well. So if it doesn't align properly, you can click on those two buttons to get it how you want. We can take a look and see things are pretty much lined up. So there is a little bit of slack that was built into it. So let me show you here. If you see the alignment, it's just ever so slightly off, and that's because there is some allowances for tolerancing. So if you just have it locked to the side, that's okay. So you see how there's that small extra gap on one that one side has that the other doesn't. That's okay. And so just like that, my assembly is finished. I can grab my yoke and it spins. I can grab my vertical shaft and it slides. Oh, I'm still on the yoke. Vertical shaft slides. And one thing we might want to fix as well is obviously that lower limit shouldn't be 0 anymore because of the yoke. So what we can do to change that is I can go back into that first slider limit, which was right there, edit that, and instead of a maximum of 0, maybe we make this, I think that's 1 inch thick, so maybe we make it -1. That looks pretty close. Good enough. So there's the assembly of the vertical shaft support.